Hey Keith, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So here's the thing I've always wanted to ask you, and it's almost starting in the middle of the story and then we can explore around it. 2012, to me, from the outside, it seemed like a seminal moment for the Paralympic athletics world. Firstly, I suppose the question is that correct? And secondly, from your perspective, what happened at that moment in time that suddenly it became part of the everyman's conscious, I suppose?
I think there were a couple of things, Nick. I think that it had actually been growing probably since about 2000. I think the games in Sydney were one of the first games where they really tried to put it on a level. But it's also about exposure. And one of the things that happened was the broadcaster changed in 2012.
Okay.
And it was the first time the broadcaster really wanted to almost go head to head with the Olympics. They wanted to put on a show that was as good. And there you can look back at the advertising campaigns and things that they did. And so people really got to know what was happening. They got to know the sports. They got to know the people, some of the athletes concerned. They had that whole thing around the superheroes and they made it into something special.
Okay, and from your perspective, how did that affect you and your talent, kind of who you were training up at the time, and kind of did it impact you guys at all? Were you feeling it more intensely, or?
I mean, in a way, it was a little bit strange because we were out at the holding camp just prior to the games. So we, get out of the country so you don't get hit with all the media and all that stuff. Every now and then, you sort of come off social media, but every now and then, if I'm talking to I remember a conversation with my brother and he was saying, it's big. And I'm going, what do you mean? No, he's going, trust me, it's big. But I had no concept of that. And when we flew back in, and just moving from the airport to the village, oh my word, that's when it really hit. And just going into the stadium every day, full stadium, every morning, every evening, 80,000 people. That's never happened before. It's never even happened before in the Olympics, let alone on the Paralympics. So,
and how did, kind of from your perspective, as ultimately as the coach of the talent, and you've taken them to that point, and really, well, I don't know, you can tell me, but I suppose at that point it's up to them. How do you switch your mind, because you've got to presumably keep them at a level, and you're also dealing with something which you've never experienced either beforehand as well. What was going through your head, and what were you?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's almost cliche-ish, but the way that I like to work and things like that, so that you don't feel so much of that build-up and that pressure, is they were going in to perform in events that they've done time after time after time, stuff they've done in competition, in training. Yes, it was going to be bigger. Yes, there were going to be more people watching it, but you're doing exactly what you've always done. And so for me, it was much more about people, my athletes being able to go in confident that they could deliver the performance they wanted to deliver, and not worrying about the occasion. Impossible to ignore the occasion. Home games, massive stadium, people going wild. So my advice to them was simply enjoy it. So people will say, I saw lots of people doing strategies to kind of keep the crowd out of their heads, and so I go, no, forget that. When your name gets called in that stadium, they are going to go wild. And they did. So I go, do it. Turn around, wave, do whatever you want to do backflips. I don't care what you do. Enjoy the moment. As they then introduce the next athlete, your head goes straight back to, what am I here to do?
And how do you, as a coach, or get to that place where you think that this is the best thing for your guys? Because presumably for you as well, it must have been a unique environment, and the first time you've been in there, so you don't know. You know as much about what the right thing is to do. You're trusting yourself in terms of this is what they should be doing, but you only get one chance in terms of getting it right or wrong.
And that is the point. You only get the one chance. And so what I'm a great believer in is and I think this is true in sport, I think it's true in life, if you learn to execute whatever it is you need to do, that's the thing that enables you to stay calm and to be controlled in those moments. So the athletes have to execute their stuff. I, as the coach, have to make sure that in the in the warm-up conversations and everything else, I'm doing what I need to do to the best level to enable them to do. So we practice that. So at training sessions, when it's cold and it's dark and there's nobody else around, and if they've got to do a rep over 150 meters, so this is the rep, this is how it needs to be done. off we go, let's make that happen. And when you're doing that time after time, session after session, week after week, month after month, you don't know, so what are you going into that stadium to do? And we don't have conversations around, I want to win the gold, I want to do this. That's not what it's about. What are you going to execute? What are the steps that you need to perform really well in order to get the performance that you want?
So are you also almost training yourself well at the same time in terms of what are the steps that you...
Absolutely. Because you're right, when you sort of walk in and you're moving from the hotel to the warm-up track it's really easy, even as a coach, to get carried away with the moment.
Yeah.
You can't be doing that. Yeah. Well, if they see me getting carried away with the moment, well, then they get carried away with the moment. So as strange as it sounds, it literally is another day at the office. Bigger office, more people in the office, but it's another day at the office. And that's really where your head needs to be. Okay. Otherwise, you start getting ahead of yourself, and that's just not good.
That's what doesn't work at all. No. So we move on from 2012, which was enormously successful for you and you guys. Coming out of it for you, because kind of we're now 7 years beyond, but coming out of it for you, what did you want post 2012 for you yourself, but also for the Paralympic scene? Do you think it's progressed and moved on, or has it gone backwards, I suppose?
No, I think there has been, it's been patchy. Like with a lot of things, it's still developing, so some things have moved on. I think one of the things that 2012 did was it put it onto another footing. It definitely moved beyond, isn't it great that people can just have a go at something too? And actually the challenge then was the audience wanted to come along and see elite sport. They want to see serious sport. And so the participants now have to go, we're serious sports people. And for some, that was an easier transition than for others. Okay. But that's really where it's moving towards. Not universally as yet, but it is slowly moving in that direction.
And is that kind of, again, listen, we're in the UK, so therefore we're very UK focused. Is that a world movement, or do you think that's just UK and maybe some other countries too?
No, it is across the world, but different. There are so many. There's such a range of events and of classifications that some nations will tend to focus in certain areas. Okay. So some nations are big on wheelchair racing. Some nations are big in cerebral palsy activities. Some are big on So it's not all the nations try to cover everything. Some will kind of cherry pick and go, this is our area of expertise, and that's the area we're going to really move forward in.
Okay, interesting. And for you, kind of since then, where are you at and what's going on, and how are you doing?
I think for me, 2012 was just such a big moment. However, pretty much as soon as it was over from 2012, my brain then starts to switch, and I knew that certainly main athlete was going to go to 2016. Yeah. So I'm even on the walk back out of the stadium, you can hear all the noise and the anthems are going. I'm walking back going, okay, we've got 4 years to do this again.
And when did you get your satisfaction? When did you get your moment where you're like, I've achieved what I want to achieve, or is it never there?
With me, it seldom gets to that point. I enjoy the moment. The performance is there, and you look at it and you go, how was that performance? But for me, it's more in terms of how was that in terms of, I'm rating that against what we planned to do. Yeah. So if it was where we wanted it to be, then we go, great. What do we learn from that? What made that work? If we've got to do that again, what are the things we carry forward? What are the things we change? So
from a coach's perspective, do you think anyone could ever run the perfect race?
Very few athletes would say that they have run the perfect race. Right. They can often look back. Well, they tend to perform in two different ways. Some athletes will perform and look back and be able to analyze the performance because that's just the way they work. And others will be able to tell you virtually nothing because they were just in the zone, the performance happened, and they really cannot remember much about it at all.
And what do you prefer as a coach?
You work with what you've got, to be honest. But I think for the way I work, it's easier. And I actually try to develop athletes in a way so that they can analyze the performance themselves, because then that makes them less reliant on me or anybody else.
So how much, when an athlete comes to you to ask you if you'll help them and train them and everything like that, how much are you looking at them in terms of their personalities and individuals as much as get about their talent?
For me, it's at least as much about the individual, the personality, how they work, how they operate. They develop as an individual, they'll develop as an athlete.
And how would you judge that when you meet them? What would you be doing? What would you be?
Just sit and have some conversations initially, and then we look at what we're trying to achieve. I understand what they're trying to achieve. They get to tell me how they want to work, what they expect from me. I say, okay, here's what I expect from you, and here's what I'm prepared to do. Yeah. If those things match up, then it's great. If they don't, then we go, well, it was a nice conversation, but it's not going to happen. So yeah, that's really how we go. Okay.
And you work in a sporting environment which actually is constantly changing in terms of the equipment and everything going on around you. How do you stay in touch with what's going on? How do you decide whether or not you should be using it? Is that down to the athletes, or is that down to you as guys as a team? And also, from your perspective, I suppose, where does the equipment stand? For want of a better word, where does the equipment? What is the at what point does the equipment and everything around you detract from the athlete's talent and where they're going?
I would say I'm a bit old school with this stuff, Nick. In so much as I look at, so if I take Richard as an example, I look at the way that he ran when he first came to me, and I didn't get particularly involved in the technicalities and the blades and the this and that. I just looked at the way that he ran, and he ran like an endurance person, which is what he was, and he wanted to run like a sprinter. So we had to get some work done there. And for me, it's more about improve the athletes and make them better at what they do. For me, then the technicalities, that's almost the icing on the cake. Okay. Deal with that afterwards. But fundamentally, the reason Richard is as successful as he is, and the reason he beats everybody that he beats, he runs better than they do. Okay. That's the bottom line. It's not the blades, it's not anything else. He's in better shape and his technique is better. That's what we've spent a lot of years doing. I see a lot of other athletes, go, I need longer blades, I need shorter blades, I need stiffer blades. I'm just looking, going, yeah, first of all, you need to learn how to run properly.
But do you think, have you seen a change over your years looking after Richard and other athletes? Have you seen a change of attitude in terms of people coming along and thinking that the technology can get them to where they want to get to?
Yeah. I mean, it is changing. And I think increasingly now there's less of a reliance on, if I get the best technology, then I'll perform. Okay. And people are actually realizing it's no different in that sense from on the Olympic side. You've got to put some work down, and you've got to put the right work down, and then you will get the result.
And do you think there was a moment when that changed, or something happened, or a realization?
I think it's a gradual thing. Okay. I think it's a gradual thing as people, some will learn the hard way, where they'll invest loads in the technology and still the performance doesn't go anywhere. So having the best blades, having the best equipment, having the best chairs and whatever, that's not what's going to make you an elite athlete. What will make you an elite athlete is doing some elite work in the right way.
And from your perspective, in terms of your methods and your methods and your processes and everything you're doing with the athletes, how has that progressed? What's changed for you in terms of what you're doing?
In a way, as the years have gone on, I've merged more what I do in sport with what I do in business. I now look at how I coach and the things that I look at. It is, for me, now much more data-driven. It is much more planning. The planning is in greater detail. And what that does, it gives you the confidence to know that you're where you need to be at any given time of the year.
And is that, again, I suppose the question in terms of, is that because the data for you is more readily available, or just you developed and matured in terms of your overall perspective of life, I suppose?
I've developed a way of capturing the data that works for me. I mean, different coaches will capture different things, but I know what works for me, what works for the processes that I like to use, the training methods that I like to use. And if I've got the data around that, then yeah, we know how we're going. So, you know, normally, and it's not this year, this year's a very late year, but normally the peak of the season is sort of that sort of July, August, September window.
Yeah.
By the time we get to May, June, I know what's going to happen.
Okay.
So, you know, there are no surprises.
And do the athletes know what's going to happen?
Yeah. And that's what gives them the confidence. So when they walk into a stadium of 80,000 people, they're going, I know what I'm here to do, and I know I can do it. So this extra stuff is just extra juice for me to play with and to use in order to deliver the performance that I want to deliver. So it's something they use rather than something that gets in the way.
Have you ever been surprised? Have you ever said, this is what's going to happen, and then someone far exceeds what you expected? Or
on the day, seldom.
Yeah.
That seldom happens simply because the data that we're tracking will tell me, you know, there's a certain range that I know that performance is likely to fall into. Every now and then, yes, you do get something which is a bit of a surprise, but it's not. Yeah, I can't think of many times when that's actually happened.
So what's next? Where are we now?
Well, it's the balance now of on the road to Tokyo. I'm taking 2 athletes, all being well, through to the games in Tokyo, and then also, you know, so that's the athletic side, and on the business side, it's continuing to evolve that and looking at ways of helping people in organisations to do the things that they need to do more effectively.
And how kind of, you mentioned earlier, just kind of how the two things have merged together to be one. At what point, and was there a moment for you that clarity thought that actually the message you're delivering in terms of the athletics and sporting world are messages that actually business needs to understand and needs to appreciate? Was it a distinct thing, or was it just a...
No, not a particular moment. I don't think. It's sort of evolved as it's gone along, and you just realise that the things that deliver success and the things that deliver performance tend to be pretty universal, and it almost doesn't matter what the context is. There are some key principles that seem to work, and so I've just found that as the years have gone on, the ability to take things out of the world of sport and apply them in business, and take things out of the world of business and apply them in sport, that just works nicely, and the more of that we do, the better the results seem to roll.
Keith, thanks so much for your time today. Really
Pleasure.
appreciate it. Lovely chatting.
You too.
Cheers.